I thank the senator for his amendment 3580. I do not support it. I don't think we need a new or an end run around the Jones Act waiver process. There is a very well-established process in law now to allow waivers when an emergency or national security is at stake. The required evaluation can be completed very quickly in case of a true emergency, and there are no indications that the Jones Act waiver is needed to solve the supply chain crisis or access to LNG. 20 administrative Jones Act waivers have been issued over the past 5 years for true national emergencies. That includes 2 during the Colonial Pipeline emergency, 11 during Hurricane Maria and Irma in 2017, so the process works. Additional legislative loopholes only weaken the law that protects the U.S. maritime industry, one that I think we, after looking at supply chain issues, need to strengthen. 650,000 American jobs, and they contribute more than $15 billion to the national economy, but because we have the Jones Act. The Jones Act protects our national and economic security, ensuring we have a strong merchant marine and shipbuilding industry. So I'd ask my colleagues to oppose this amendment.
Madam Chair.
Senator Wicker.
I too oppose this amendment. And I think the author will agree with me that his amendment actually doesn't address the root cause. I think that Senator Cruz and I would agree that actually the United States is the Saudi Arabia of the world in natural gas, and it is decisions made by the Biden administration that have essentially stopped LNG by rail, and also some decisions by various states to oppose the production. So I think at least he and I will agree that this would not get at the root cause. But as the chair has said, there is already a waiver process. The waiver process under the Cruz Amendment would require discretion by the administration, just as we currently have now. And then finally, I do believe the Cruz Amendment would undermine the Jones Act and the American shipbuilding industry and their workers. If this sort of amendment had been in place for the last decade, there are 19 oil tankers and 23 barges made by Americans, by American workers for Americans, that would not ever have been built. So while I think that the senator and I agree on the basics that our natural gas policy is wrongheaded in the United States, I do not believe this amendment would be helpful. As a matter of fact, would be harmful to American jobs and American security.
Madam Chair, if I could respond to the comments made, I would say 2 things. Number one, the argument that this would somehow undermine the Jones Act, I think is objectively false. As I mentioned, of the 478 ships dedicated to transporting LNG, 0 are compliant with the Jones Act. So if you're asking, I understand there are members on both sides of the aisle that are strong supporters of the Jones Act that want to see the U.S. maritime industry, want to see ships built here. It is objectively correct that this is not succeeding with LNG. There are 0 ships. The senator from Mississippi said, well, gosh, if this amendment had been the law, we wouldn't see the oil tankers and bargers. With respect, that is incorrect. This doesn't apply to oil tankers and barges. It applies to liquid natural gas, a very specialized transportation, so it would have had 0 impact on those ships. So right now, the Jones Act, with regard to LNG transport, is producing 0 jobs. There are no shipbuilding jobs, there's no crew jobs, because there are no ships. And nobody thinks there are going to be any ships anytime soon. So there is no affirmative benefit for any shipbuilder, for any American crew, to saying we will only allow foreign LNG transports to come in, because that's the effect of voting no, is you're going to say we're going to let all the foreign ships in, but we don't want, the foreign ships can only carry foreign LNG, not American natural gas. That's the effect of no. And I would say, secondly, both the chairman and ranking member have pointed to the waiver process. It is true there's a waiver process for things like emergencies, like the Colonial Pipeline. You know what's not deemed an emergency? the fact that the people of Puerto Rico pay twice as much for energy as people in the mainland. You know what's not deemed an emergency? The fact that people in the Northeast are paying 50% more for energy to heat their homes than the rest of the country. You know what's not deemed an emergency? The fact that people in Massachusetts in 2018 paid 450% more to heat their homes than Texas and Louisiana. That's not deemed an emergency, and anyone who votes no is saying to those consumers, tough luck, there will be no solution. You're going to continue to have to import foreign natural gas because we are voting to say you are not allowed to import American natural gas. It's hurting consumers, and it's hurting our national security, and it's not benefiting a job. It hasn't produced even a single Jones Act ship in the entire time it's been in place. And by the way, if it did, let's say tomorrow magically a Jones Act ship was built, that the an American shipyard decided to produce a Jones Act ship, this waiver doesn't apply then. The instant there's an American ship, that American ship gets the contract. So the waiver only applies if there are no ships available. So a no vote is saying, even though there are no ships, we want it to be illegal for you to purchase American natural gas. I got to say, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, Senator, you remind me of the time that the Energy Committee had the same hearing, and a very large Wall Street interest of home heating oil tried to make the same point about the fact that Northeast home heating oil was higher because of the Jones Act. And when I pointed out to him that his company had been fined for manipulating those prices, then he kind of stepped back a second. So I think there's lots of issues here that we're talking about. I don't think the Jones Act is going to, a waiver of the Jones Act will solve our problems. But hopefully we'll have the oil companies' executives here soon, and we can talk about all these issues about what's causing the problem. Further discussion.